3,000 years before anyone in Indianapolis or Chicago picked up a basketball for a WNBA game, there was a goddess. Her name was Ishtar, Inanna, to the Sumerians before her. And she had priests, not ordinary priests. Priests who wore a robe that was masculine on one side of the body and feminine on the other. Priests who, as part of their consecration to her, underwent ritual castration. The ancient world has specific names for them. The assinnu, the kurgarru. And historians who study this era point to an ancient Near Eastern text that describes a man whose, quote, maleness Ishtar turned female for the awe of the people, end quote. I am not dramatizing that for effect. That's how scholars of the ancient Near East describe real cultic personnel who served in a real temple across multiple empires for well over 1,000 years. This was not a fringe practice. This was organized, state-sanctioned religion built around the worship of a specific deity. I bring this up today because there is a debate happening right now in the WNBA. A debate about biology, if you can believe that. A debate about fairness, identity, and who gets to compete in women's sports. And before we get into the headlines, I want you to sit with something the culture is not talking about. This is not new. This is not progress. This is a very old story, wearing a very new jersey. This is the Marc Little Show. I am Marc Little. I'm your host. I'm a pastor, I'm a lawyer, and a political commentator. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Marc Little Show. I'm Marc Little. I'm your host. I'm a pastor, lawyer, and a political commentator. Today's episode is called The Goddess of Gender Chaos. What Ishtar has to do with the WNBA. And if that title sounds like a strange pairing, please stay with me. By the time we're done today, I think you'll see it's not strange at all. It's the same story the human race keeps telling itself, generation after generation, dressed up in whatever the culture of the moment happens to be wearing. Let's get into it. Let's start with who these people actually were. Because I don't want to overstate this, and I don't need to. The truth is strong enough on its own. In the worship of Inanna, later called Ishtar, in Akkadian and Babylonian religion, there were several classes of temple personnel who did not fit the ordinary categories of male or female. The gala sang in a dialect of Sumerian, normally reserved for female speech, and sometimes pick feminine names. The kurgarru performed ecstatic processions and war dances in the goddess's honor, dressed in garments that were deliberately split, masculine on one side, feminine on the other. And the assinnu, according to multiple scholarly sources, underwent ritual castration as part of their consecration to Ishtar. There's a poem written by a woman named Enheduanna, a real historical figure, high priestess of the moon god in the city of and the earliest author in human history whose name we actually know, writing in the 23rd century before Christ. She wrote this about Inanna's power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man belongs to her. That's Enheduanna. Now, I do want to be careful because scholars are divided on exactly what this meant. Sounds pretty clear to me. But some argue these figures represent something close to what we'd today call gender identity. Others will argue it was a ritual role, a performance for the goddess, not necessarily how these individuals understood themselves the rest of their lives. So I'm not going to pretend the historical record settles the argument, because it doesn't. But the fact that this has been going on for this long should mean something to the culture today related to false deity. But here's what it does settle. This was not a handful of individuals operating outside the boundaries of their society. This was official temple religion. It had a structure. It had names, categories, ritual procedures. It lasted in various forms from Sumer through Babylon, through Assyria, over 1,000 years. And it was all built around the worship of a specific false god. So when people tell you that questioning fixed binary gender categories is some brand new frontier of human enlightenment, I want you to remember Enheduanna. She was writing about a goddess with power to blur the line between man and woman 4,000 years ago. This is not humanity's newest idea. It might, in fact, be one of its oldest. Now let's come back to what's happening right now. This whole conversation reignited because Indiana Fever, the wonderful guard, Sophie Cunningham, she said publicly that she wants to protect young girls who, in her words, shouldn't have to compete against biological men in sport. And that set off a firestorm. Days later, the WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert sent a memo to every team in the league. She acknowledged that questions about transgender participation in women's basketball have been coming in for weeks. And she said, and I'm reading this directly, that she expects the topic to continue receiving significant attention. What a profound statement she made with such courage. She stopped short, way short, of taking a position either way. I'm not sure she can even make a decision about anything. But she did say that preserving the integrity of the game and ensuring fair competition remain among the league's highest priorities. Yeah, we'll see. A task force of team presidents and general managers is set to take this up at a previously scheduled meeting. Don't hold your breath for anything courageous. And then, almost like clockwork, two former NBA players, Royce White and Enes Kanter Freedom, I love him, announced they intend to declare for the 2027 WNBA draft, arguing that under the league's own inclusion standards, well, they should be eligible. I think it's fair to call that a stunt. However, probably because they can't pay them enough, it's meant to expose what they see as inconsistency in the league's position by pushing it to its logical extreme. But stunt or not, it's forcing the league to answer a question it has mostly avoided answering directly. And I think they've avoided it altogether. On the other side, you've got voices like Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeve, who's been outspoken for years in support of trans inclusion in the league. According to Fox News reporting, she went as far as writing an op-ed in Sports Illustrated, making the case that everyone wins when transgender athletes are welcomed onto the court. Yes, you hear a bit of sarcasm in my voice. And if you're wondering what that means, here's where I stand. I don't think this is actually a close call. Biological men do not belong in women's sports. Full stop. Why is that controversial? I don't know, and I don't care. Title IX exists for exactly one reason: to guarantee women a fair, protected space to compete on their own biological terms. If the current legal and regulatory framework is unclear enough that a league can dodge the question in a memo by what seems to be an imbecile, then the law is doing its job badly, and it needs to be fixed until it's unclear anymore. This isn't a gray area to me. It's a matter of basic fairness to every young woman who trained her whole life for a level playing field. And how dare we dilute that opportunity because someone wants to pretend to be a woman? Strip away the jersey. Strip away the league logo. Strip away the legal debate. And what you actually have is a society trying to decide, once again, whether maleness and femaleness are fixed things handed to us or fluid things we get to construct and reassign. That's not a new argument. We just met the people who had this argument 4,000 years ago. They had priests who carried that banner. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Marc Little Show. Today's episode, the goddess of gender chaos. What Ishtar has to do with the WNBA. Now let's bring this all the way to home court. Genesis chapter 1. That gives us the oldest recorded answer to this question. Of course, nobody checks it. And it couldn't be more different from Ishtar's temple. Come with me to Genesis 1, verse 27. I'm reading from the ESV version. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female. He created them. Notice what that verse does not say. It doesn't say male and female are social constructs the culture can invent later. It doesn't say gender is a spectrum. Humanity gets to redraw generation by generation. It says male and female were part of the original design, spoken into existence by God and called good. Fixed categories, not fluid ones, built into the very image of God himself. Some Old Testament scholars actually connect this directly to what we talked about at the top of this episode. There's a law in Deuteronomy that reads like this. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5, it says, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. That's the text. Don't be mad at me. A number of scholars suggest that law wasn't written in a vacuum. It was written in a world that already had assinnu and kurgarru walking around in split gender ritual dress, serving a goddess who supposedly had power to blur the line between man and woman. Israel's law wasn't inventing a new rule out of thin air. It was drawing a hard line against a religious practice their neighbors were already doing in the name of Ishtar. So here's the pattern. You need to see this. Every generation, humanity keeps rediscovering the same old rebellion against the created order. And every generation calls it something new. Ishtar's priests called it devotion to the goddess. Our generation calls it progress, or inclusion, or self-expression. Different vocabulary, same underlying claim that God did not get to have the final word on what a man is and what a woman is. And we do. Now hear me, because I don't want to be misunderstood. This is not a segment about hating anyone. I don't believe God hates the assinnu of ancient Babylon. And I don't believe he hates a single person caught up in this conversation today, whether you are struggling with your gender or not. God loves you. Whatever side of this discussion that you're standing on. Every person in this debate, on every side, is made in the image of God and loved deeply by him. That is not in question. What is in question is whether the people running our institutions, our leagues, our courts, are going to keep pretending this is a brand new frontier of human wisdom, when it's actually one of the oldest lies on record. The God has changed. The claim did not. So what do we do with all of this? You stop being surprised when you see the next headline, the next league memo, the next athlete forced to take a stand. Don't treat it like the world just discovered something new about gender and fairness. Recognize the shape of it. This is not a sports story. It's a worship story. Every culture eventually has to answer the question of who defines male and female. The God who made them or the institutions of the moment? Ishtar's temples answered that question one way for 1,000 years. Genesis answered it before that, and it hasn't changed since. Know what you believe, and know why you believe it before the next headline asks you to answer under pressure. Get it right. Be rooted in what is truth. This has been the Marc Little Show. I'm Marc Little. I am your host. I'm a pastor, I'm a lawyer, and a political commentator. Get truth in all you do. Amen.